Hi everybody, I'm back again. So you're going to notice one thing right away, and that's there's going to have been some changes between this chapter and every other chapter, maybe. So what I noticed was I was trying to do the editing for this chapter, which is chapter 9, and the audio is out. The video was freezing and there was no way to try and fix it. I can do it if the audio and video are out, but still, like, if they're still working, either one is still working, it's fine. But because the video was freezing, there was no way to properly sync everything up. So I decided it was so bad that I just had to re-record. Yes, this novel specifically has been a challenge all the way around. Just from like worrying about community guidelines to because I actually care about those sort of things and the comfort level of people. I'm crazy that way. So this is me recording right before I'm about to release it. So I'm going to be recording it, then editing it, and then releasing it. So I'm hoping to be able to have this all ready for you tomorrow being Wednesday. It's a goal. This is my goal. I just want to see. It depends on how well the recording goes. I am recording on two different videos, so that I can try and just sort of make sure that everything syncs up correctly, because I'm a little bit worried about one of my setups not being. One is pretty much a guarantee because the audio and the video are inside, so everything is being streamed together. The other one is I have a camera, I have the audio, they're being recorded separately, so it has to, it's only as good as the software that's taking it in. So I'm doing what I can. However, so that's enough of my preamble. Now it's time for me to read the story to you. For those of you who are not really sure what I'm talking about, this is me reading the Plague Wizards, because it was originally live streamed back in August of 2020. So we're even talking different time of year, different, so they're different hairstyle, different glasses. I didn't even have the watch. That's also new. And you get to have that. But anyway, so I'm currently reading, I'm currently reading my dad's novels, and I'm using these as a way of being able to figure out what needs to be fixed in them for editing purposes. But at the same time, while I'm reading them out loud, you get a story. So it kind of works all the way around. So without further ado, this is chapter 9 of The Plague Wizards. If you are interested, you can go back to previous videos to take a look at the earlier chapters in the story. Okay, so chapter 9. The royal messenger was upset and fearful, which made him hostile. The king demands your presence immediately to explain the most recent doings of Pengua household. Royan nodded. He'd expected no less. Certainly. He looked around. Ormont, you're in charge while I'm away. Take all necessary measures. Ormont nodded in return. Yes, Grandmaster. The military escort formed round Royan, and they marched off, taking their cue from the royal messenger. They were as rude as they dared be. They took a circuitous route through the city to display as widely as possible the arrest of the Grand Master of Pengua House. Nothing specifically had been said about an arrest, but Royan knew that it was merely a technicality. They prevented the people from throwing stones and other solid missiles, but only objected to throwing other objects if the objects came too near any part of the escort. Royan kept calm. It was uncomfortable, but he could stand it. He was certain that the king was not yet at the point of playing some sort of game which ended in death, accidental or otherwise, of the Grand Master of Pengwa household before he, the king, could confront that Grand Master and pronounce a death sentence. As for the possibility of a death sentence, that was something that Royan hoped to prevent by one means or another. He had taken some precautions before the royal messenger had shown up at the door. They marched through the outer palace and on into the presence of the king. All the way along, various people watched the progress of the once mighty Grand Master of Pengwa household. The courtroom was decorated with fine statuary and expensive jeweled carvings, the better to demonstrate the power of the king. The king himself, in his robes of state, sat upright on his throne. He was a dark-complexioned man and strongly built. His face was tight with anger. "So, Grand Master of Pengwa, what have you done to us now?" With respect, great king," Royan said, "we had received word of an attack on you by the Saljashanites. We sent word to your servants requesting leave to pass on the news, but for whatever reason, we received no response. Yesterday evening, we decided to take action rather than waiting longer and thus being held account for the destruction of the king in the capital." The king sneered. "And you're successful, of course. Since I am still alive, how nice. And there's no way you can prove you wrong. We can prove you wrong, is there?" "Great king, it is unfortunately not so simple as that. In our limited state, we were able to preserve you and your household, but unfortunately we do not have the power to save the whole city. Sometime soon the plagues will hit, and it will be bad. If you were to order the other wizardly houses to assist, we can ameliorate the situation greatly. If not, the result will be tragedy." "The result will be..." "Grand Master, what have you done now?" So, Royan realized, it had come to this. The king had heard what he wanted to hear, not what Royan had said. As far as the king was concerned, Royan and Pengwa household themselves had attacked the city in an effort to impress or possibly threaten the king. He pulled himself up. "No, great king, I believe you misunderstand. We have the information that will enable us to save most of the city, but we require assistance." "I think not. Recent history shows that Pengwa household cares little but the welfare of Pengwa household. Enough of your threats and extortion, Grand Master. In fact, enough of you. Yourself. Guards." "Wait!" Royan's voice, magically augmented, stopped everyone for a moment. In that moment, Royan held up his right middle forefinger, and a 3-foot-long green flame flared at its tip. In the same moment, everyone present, save for Royan himself, sneezed violently. The guards stopped and looked at the king. Royan spoke again. "I may be a fool in some things, great king, but not so much of a fool to put myself into your hands without some safeguards. The man I left in my place at Pengwa household has orders. If I do not return and return safely, then he will break down all the magical protections around your household, and you will not help us. If you will not help us, then do not hinder us, and we will save, unaided, as much of the city as we may." "You are threatening me, then!" "Great king, I make no threats. You still rule the land of Rosthan, and I will do my best to prevent the destruction of the city and the nation by enemy attack. As far as I'm concerned, there will be peace between our households, if only because the lack of peace makes it difficult for me to carry out my task. Now, to prevent any misunderstanding, might I request an escort of your troops to my home?" The route back home was shorter, and the trip was less disturbed. When they reached the main door of Pengwa household, the royal messenger in charge of the escort seemed almost on the verge of ordering one of the soldiers to put a spear through Royan, but apparently good sense won out. Ormond looked at the state of Royan's clothing and said, "Trouble?" "We've been in trouble since the night Tangrel decided to do his work without appropriate safeguards. All that happened today is that it's been pushed home to the king that he and his household have become steadily more dependent on one household, Pangua, for all wizardly protection. We're going to have to make preparations to evacuate the rest of the household from the city, and if necessary, stand off the king." "Stand off? Sanad's flaming toenails, what have you done?" "I insisted on trying to protect as much of Gekapang as possible. It just may be that I tried a little too hard, but if you don't mind, we can fight that out later." "Royan?" Royan whirled on him. "Listen, Ormond, I made decisions. Way back at the beginning of this mess, I took the only decisions I could see that would end up with Pangua household broken up and scattered among the other households, unable to use our ability to make up for what Tangrel had done. Right now, we've come to a point where everything's coming down on us. And every minute we spend debating the past is another minute taken away from planning for the immediate future. After the storm had passed, we can all enjoy the recriminations we want. Right now, we have things that must be done. Can you accept that?" For a moment, the matter stood on a knife's edge, whether Ormond would accept Royan's ruling as Grand Master, or rend the household by irreparably rejecting Royan's authority in the face of immediate danger. Finally, Ormond nodded. "All right, we'll go your way. But I don't think this is forgotten, Royan." "No, I won't think that. Let's get down to preparations." Pippicat Lingbagget's child was nervous. "You're pressing for Valadander's household to move forward on the agreement? Isn't that a little hasty?" Royan looked at him. "Meaning you've heard about the latest business between Pangua household and the royal household? And you're feeling shy about even the thought of being connected to us? You know, this attack from Saljashan is coming. And one of these days, however much you and the king and all the rest doubt it. You've read the copies of the Shaldashanite material, haven't you?" Pippicalet looked as though he were swallowing something extremely sour. "Yes, I've read it. I read parts of it. Parts of it I read twice and 3 times. It's scary for sure, but what? It came to you via Pangua household with our reputation attached to it? Tell me, do you think we put together something like that, including making sure that it read as if a Shaldashanite had written it, just to frighten people?" "I don't personally, but a lot of people are saying that Pangua household is about to make a push to replace the royal house." "Come on, Pippicalet, follow the steps that I would have taken. I'm the Grand Master right now. I'm the one trying to push this thing. This means I'd have had to have had someone from the start the thing off for me, or I did it myself, hiding my own real identity. I'd also have to arrange for Tangrel to pull that trick of his and almost kill me in the process. Or else I arranged some skillful thing by myself that killed or incapacitated everyone, meaning that some kind of exact formulation to kill or incapacitate everyone, but not damage myself too badly. All this to carry out some kind of extortion scheme." He paused, then leaned forward. "Wouldn't it have been much more simple for me to provide the plagues and all, let them cut through their population, and then suddenly, in a great effort, destroy the plagues and announce myself as savior of the nation? Wouldn't it?" Pippicalet leaned away from him and took a deep breath. You make a good case, Grand Master. I have to do better than that. I have to make a convincing case and start moving now, either today or as close to it as possible. I'm risking my house and all to try to stop this thing, and I'd really like to give my people some small chance to save their lives as a reward." Pippicalet took another deep breath. "All right. I'll push it through Valadander's Council of Masters as soon as possible. I wish I could give you some solid guarantee, but I'm going to have to twist some arms and make some speeches. Better than that, I can't promise." Royan nodded and smiled. A smile that showed more confidence than he felt. You'll manage, Pipicalot. A day and a half after Royan's confrontation with the king, one of the younger wizards on shift watching the spell of detection called out, "It's here! It's here!" His supervisor, Borrelil from Solaki, responded to the young man's call. Borrelil was a little paunchy and somewhat sour at the discovery that he was required to be put on a probationary period with Pango household before he could be put in some kind of supervisory role he felt he deserved. What now? He looked at the spell of detection, a landscape view of the city magically projected on a blank wall. A fierce orange pillar stood over the royal household. Sanet's buttocks, what have you been hiding? Wait until the Grandmaster sees this. He rang the small crystal bell that would resound throughout the house. The two stood watching then until the Grandmaster appeared. He'd clearly thrown on his clothes in a hurry. Borrelil gestured toward the picture before them. This useful fellow let things like this get this far before calling me, sir. I called you as soon as I knew. The younger man said nothing, only stood looking sullen. But the Grandmaster glanced from the picture to the two wizards, then snapped, Borrelil, if you want to be a master, act like one. Everyone was told that the spell would show first what looked to be a small orange sandstorm, building to this within moments. Go pass the word to the people working the protection of the city that it's time to shift to the evacuation. You, young man, what's your name? Nambar from Akol, Grandmaster? You know you're part of the evacuation plan? Yes, Grandmaster. Good. Keep watch here for the time being. I don't expect anything to change, but if it does, sound the alarm again. Don't stay too long. The household can't afford to leave anyone behind. Yes, Grandmaster. No, Grandmaster. And the Grandmaster smiled grimly. Don't worry, we pretty much are all confused by now. It's up to me to straighten things out as well as I can. Allison came awake in the middle of the night to hear the alarm bell ringing. They explained the meaning of the alarm bell to everyone. It meant that everyone should assemble at one of the series of points in the house from which orderly evacuation would begin. She wondered if orderly evacuations in this world were any more orderly than evacuations back home. She grabbed the few things she had to carry, including library books. It occurred to her what would happen if she lost a library book. The household library appeared to be run on an honor system, though she had a suspicion that in her case the honor was connected to Royan's wish that she have complete freedom of the library. There were no cards, just a little slip of paper on which you put your name and the book's title, so that the librarians knew who had which book. If someone requested a book you were using, the honor system said you'd return it to the library as soon as possible. You know, girl, she muttered to herself, for a person in a strange world and about to start evacuating a city that may well be hostile, your mind is taking some very weird turns. Her own evacuation station was the canteen, one of several places in the house that could contain a number of people at once. By the time she arrived, a lot of people were already there. It seemed to be a mix of servants and wizards, some more excited than others. An older wizard came in, slightly hurried, carrying something that looked a great deal like a clipboard. It didn't have a clip, though, and there seemed to be some sort of magic stylus with which he could change pages. He also seemed to have done some magical augmentation of his voice, too, for though he didn't seem to speak particularly loud, when he spoke, everyone listened. All right, everyone, calm down. Yes, we're evacuating the house and the city. Yes, there's some danger, but we've organized everything to be able to minimize the danger as much as possible. First off, are we all at the right place? Everyone was told to muster at the canteen? All right, he continued. Just to be certain, I'll call your names. When I say your name, you answer here. There was a long period of repeating names and answers Some of the responses shouted out, some muttered too faintly to be heard. Allison was so caught up in listening to the names, she almost missed answering to her own. Finally, the man in charge lifted his head from the clipboard. All right. For a wonder, no one's missing. Next thing, is there anyone here who shouldn't be? Anyone whose name I didn't call? Aha, we have one. Your name? Delata Pencara's child? I don't know how you manage it, Delata, but you managed to hear canteen for baking hall. You'd better scamper. No, don't worry. There'll be someone there for a while to take you in charge. Go, go. He sighed. If we're blessed enough to have one little thing go wrong, I'll be deliriously happy, not to mention shocked silly. He sighed. Now everyone take note. We have taken the precaution of putting Paralang into an orange hat and jacket. We will all be going in an orderly fashion through the hallways to the back courtyard. Can everyone find the back courtyard? Good. Paralang will go first, and the rest will follow, counting off in sixes with a short pause after each half dozen. When you get to the back courtyard, look for the orange section. We feel almost all of you can find your section as each cart and wagon in the section is decorated with orange rags. If you can't find your section for any reason, do not attach yourself to any other group. Find someone with a clipboard. He waved his and ask where your section is. He paused and looked over them grimly. This whole process has been worked out by the Grand Master himself, in such a way that nothing should go wrong. Keep that in mind and think about yourself up in front of the Grand Master explaining to him that he was wrong. Any questions? Please understand that the stupid question is the one you didn't ask, and therefore a stupid mistake. And think how stupid you'd feel explaining that to the Grand Master. No questions were asked. He looked them over again. All right, Paralang, lead off. Paralang led off, and the man in charge called names and counted off people on his clipboard as they went. At that moment, one of the problems of making process orderly appeared. People were scattered about the room, so that on more than one occasion, a person was called across the room from the door and had to hurry across. As far as Allison could see, this would only be a serious problem if any of these late leavers didn't know how to get to the back courtyard. Since she did herself, she was still almost a stranger here. It seemed likely that everyone else could manage. Her name was the last one called. The man in charge said, almost apologetically, Allison, lady, it was thought you might not be totally familiar with the hallways of the house, so they suggested you go just before me. I think I could manage, but I accept your offer. She was actually annoyed, but caught herself well before she could take it out on a fellow following his orders. He nodded. She couldn't tell for certain whether or not he was happy to have not to have an argument, or felt a twinge of guilt at having gained that sort of reputation. There wasn't much chance to think of might-have-beens then, because no matter how skilled and detailed the Grand Master's plan had been at the beginning, the reality of this part of it was hallways full of people rushing along, some near panic. There's a lot of shouting and occasional argument escalating towards blows. When such arguments began, there was usually someone around, one of the people in the colored hat and jacket that marked a group, or one of the people's clipboards. That person would touch each of the prospective combatants, and suddenly they would go calm and move along toward their destination. The old Valium spell, Allison thought, after witnessing the second such incident. Works every time. When they came to the back courtyard, Allison found she didn't recognize it by night and torchlight, and was glad for her guide. We're over here, Allison, lady. It was fairly obvious which group was theirs. There was no mistaking the orange streamers for any other color. The guide called the roll again. "For a wonder," he said when he was done, "no one's lost, strayed, or stolen." That had not been the case with all groups, though. There were still harassed and frightened-looking people going this way and that in the courtyard. The head of the orange group grabbed the ones that came nearest him, calmed them down, and pointed them to their proper places. Heads of other groups were doing the same here and there, and shortly the situation seemed to be fairly well in hand. Allison thought it was just as well that any small children had been sent off long ago. They would have made this business even worse. "The usual great confusion, Royan," Ormant said. "Two different groups had Rukasa or Deja come up lame at the last moment and had to borrow spares from other groups. Got it straightened out, though." "Good. What word from Faladander House?" "Sorry. What word from Falander House?" "Just come in. They're expecting us." "Good. I'd expected they'd show a lot more nervousness when we had to actually move. Let's go." When he considered it, though, Royan realized that there had been nervousness aplenty displayed as the wagon loads of supplies and wagons themselves had come up slipping through the darkened streets the last several nights, moving as unobtrusively as magic could permit them to, even using a bit of magic to cut down on the noise. He hadn't even argued over the profit of Faladander House had made on the wagons and supplies. It hadn't been that heavy after all, and Royan had paid little of it in coin. There were several spells, long-held secrets of Pangua household, which many other wizardly households had greatly desired. These were worth a great deal of gold, though privately Royan wondered just how valuable they would be in Rostan in the situation the nation would find itself in shortly. Wagons rolled through the dark streets. Allison noticed that there were no such things as streetlights, and in most places not even street signs. Each wagon and cart was equipped with a magic light, sort of bioluminescence, she suspected. She was also near certain that each driver was very familiar with the streets. A driver could always follow the fellow in front and hope that that fellow didn't get lost himself. As she understood the reason for the evacuation, and the explanations given had been very rough, the expected Saldrashanite attack had been detected, and in about 2 days, people in the city would start dying. Given the reputation the Pango House had acquired over the last little while, it was very likely that they would be the center of civil unrest shortly after that. They were hoping by that time to be well out of the city and on the way towards this farming colony they'd spoken of. She didn't like the notion of deserting the city, since Pangua household had the only knowledge to fight the plagues. But she also realized that any good she could do was severely limited by their manpower. Dying heroically by being massacred by the people you're trying to save might make a stirring novel somewhere. But trying to survive to save as many people and as much knowledge as possible was more realistic. The phrase, "Curse Tangrel," was going to become very common in the next few years. She was still useless, too, a botanist in a world where not only plant life, but the study of it was very different from what she had known. To make matters worse, she could only claim to be just on the way to becoming literate. "Yeah," she muttered to herself, "curse Tangrel." The young man seated on the wagon beside her and looked up at her. "Your pardon, Allison, lady?" She shook her head. "Just talking to myself, Solitang. Nothing important." Pipikalak was nervous. Royan wondered if it should be nervous again or still nervous. "We have everything you asked us to get. I hope we've managed to keep it fairly secret, but you know yourself, sometimes a servant or even Sanet help us, a master will gossip to a friend outside the household. You don't want to join us? I think we have room at the colony for more. If not, we can expand it. Plenty of unclaimed land in the vicinity." The Grandmaster Philander household shook his head vigorously. "Not me. I was born and raised in Gagapang, and I'll stay." "It won't be comfortable in a few days." "Even so, I think we'll hang around." All right, your decision. Will your people give us a hand getting supplies stowed? Yes, we can do that. Royan had a feeling that as far as Pipikalak was concerned, the faster Pengwa fugitives got out of his courtyard, the better. But the man had carried out his part of the bargain so far, and he, Royan, had made his own fair share of hasty decisions since this thing started. Royan also wondered, then decided it was none of his business, if Pipikalak were planning on becoming the rescuer of Gagapeng. That could be risky. If people decided that Philander household were profiting off of their miseries, they might react just as badly. He turned his attention to pushing the load of supplies. The sooner they were on their way, the better. The train of wagons slipped through the streets of Gagapeng. They moved silently as their magic could make them, or at least as silent as magic could make them, and still have something left in reserve for emergency. At this time of night, there ought not to be anyone out on any lawful business. But Royan was sure that depending on that fact was not going to a good risk to take. They had lit the route with magical lights which came on at just several wagon lengths before the first wagon, and went out as many wagon lengths behind the rearmost. They discussed that thoroughly, and Royan made the other two see the great risk involved in having lights all along the route until the last wagon passed through. This way, someone's probably going to notice the light. With the lights all the way, a lot of people are going to notice them for sure. We can do without a bunch of people getting in our way. The faces of the buildings were gray and in the bluish magical light, with the strange tricks of shadow playing around every doorway and alley mouth. Philander household had been left behind to cast its fate with that of the city. Gray-blue buildings dropped behind the cavalcade, rich houses, poorer houses, shops with houses attached, and shelters that hardly rated the term house. There was a shout, more like a squawk, from one of the windows. Royan debated for a moment, casting a sleep spell, but it was likely he would need his power later on. This one person wouldn't likely be able to wake up enough people to hinder them. On they went, Rukasa puffing under the loads they were carrying. That squawk behind turned into a full shout. Royan peeled his Rukasa out of the stream of traffic and pointed in the direction of the window. A quick mutter of words was all it took before the shout died away. Bad omen for the rest of the trip. He looked around. Fortunately, Ormond was watching the rear, out of sight. On they went through the narrow, winding streets, moving at a fast trot. A gallop was too risky here, even if it wouldn't wear out the draft animals too soon. Sanat's toenails! Was that more shouting? Keep on moving, he called out. Unnecessary advice, as all the drivers were urging their Rukasa to keep moving at an increasing speed. People were coming out of the buildings now. He'd hoped to avoid a mob, and the people as yet were curious about the light and so quiet wagons. They had made sure that every wagon and cart carried their household emblem for the reassurance of the people. That could have another effect, though, to let people know who it was trying to slip out of the city. There was a gathering of roar of voices back there. It wouldn't take long for a crowd to form, even at this dark hour, and the bluish light that lighted the fugitives would also permit the hunters to track them. It would have been a nice thought to believe that they could outrun people on foot, but a wagon going around a corner had to slow down, and Rukasa, especially Rukasa hauling wagons, could not outrun a man over at any distance. Royan dropped back, and further back, until he was at the rear of the train. Loniswal and Ormond were back there, the one too young for such a position, and the other too headstrong. Cursed hangrel! A stone came whirling out of the dimness and back there to strike Royan's mount, who went into a dance. Royan calmed the animal and then pointed backward and spoke a spell. There was a roar of anger and fright. He hadn't done anything outright fatal, just a strong burst of the horrible smell they'd used to clear the people out of their back alley. It was only a burst. He didn't have the power to spend on something more than that, not when it might be needed worse somewhere further along the way. Let's go. The other two turned to follow the wagons, Ormant with an expression that said he hadn't appreciated Royan's help. Should have left it to him. He doesn't like people pushing in on his patch. Too late for that. Too late for apologies, even if they had time. The stink smell wouldn't keep the mob away very long. Ormant and Loniswell would still have work to do that night. Rattling over the cobblestones, rushing past the houses, on they went. Altogether too soon the mob was shouting on their trail. How soon would the noise bring people out ahead of them, in numbers enough to block their path? Now the first of them were coming to the gate yard, at the end of which were the great gates, shut and barred between sundown and sunup. Guarded too, but that was something Royan had prepared for. Ready with the sleep spell, Royan said. Ready, responded Calangus. Now! Calangus cast a spell. It had none of the flashy illusions that many wizards use to impress the locals, but it would put everybody in the vicinity of the gate into a deep sleep. This would include the gate guards and anyone who might be near enough to hear or see something if they looked the wrong direction at the wrong time. Solitang, you can manage the gate? Yes, Grand Master. Solitang spoke a spell, and then made an upward gesture with his hands. The bar of the gate moved up, and it was set gently aside. Solitang made another gesture, and the gate swung open. The convoy continued on its way. When the last wagon and cart were outside, Royan, Ormant, and a few of the other young wizards took on the task of closing and barring the gate, putting the bar in place without being able to see it was a tricky business. Something beyond Solitang, skilled as he might be. The mob was still coming. Ormant, Loniswell, the sleep spell, whatever it takes. They obeyed, and the first part of the mob fell asleep in the midst of their rush. The massive gates swung shut with a bang. The bar, a little fumblingly, dropped into place. Royan looked at his companions, wondering as they felt as worn as he did. We're out. Meluncto found himself alone on a crowded cart, shoulder to shoulder with 10 other people, none of whom spoke to him, barely even acknowledging his presence. He could hardly blame them. So far as they were concerned, he was the cause of their having to leave their homes behind. Even worse, he felt himself to be the cause. No matter how much he tried to tell himself that the other person would have headed the project if he had not. No, it was he, not someone else, who had brought the set of plagues close enough to perfection that someone like Hajolani would risk using them. The city of his fellow passengers, likely even their whole nation, would be destroyed, and by Meluncto's work. All to remove the possible threat of a blue blossom wizard. But the attacks he had perfected, well, not perfected, merely improved. They were not going to be killing only potential blue blossom wizards. They would be killing anyone and everyone who was not protected. I hadn't thought through the implications, any sort of exculpation? They camped on a piece of level ground 2 miles beyond the last buildings that had grown up outside the walls of Gagapang. So, 3 wagons broken down. We managed to spread their loads among others. 2 others totally unaccounted for. I'd say we'd had Senat's hand on us. Unaccounted for? Ormant demanded. How could any be unaccounted for with all the safeguards and trouble we took? Royan held his temper with an effort. They'd all been working hard, maybe too hard over the last days. I don't know how. You heard the saying, no plan is so perfect it can't go wrong. Well, it's happened to us. Maybe one of the wagons will show up mixed in with the wrong section. Maybe they won't. I don't like it any more than you, but going back to look for them just runs the risk of losing more people. And that's the end. Thank you for joining me tonight. Next week, I'm going to see what happens. I may be re-recording again next week. We're going to see what the video is like. But I will let you know. Yeah, so until next time, I will talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Good night.